Welcome to Too True Philosophy. I'm your host, the Thinking Man, and I explore philosophy that can be too true to handle. The question for this video is, should we tax the rich more, or is it too true to handle that taxes are already too high? Before drawing a conclusion, let's examine both sides of the argument.
Hopefully your conclusion will be more balanced than your last video.
Respectfully, Angry Man, opinions of what I conclude may vary. The argument for higher taxes comes from a place of left-leaning socialist politics in modern discourse, though this has always been a key flashpoint in political history. What makes the debate different today is that taxes are considerably higher than most people would have tolerated in the past. Yet many people accept this because they believe in redistributing wealth from richer elements of society to those with the greatest need. Nothing embodies this more than the well-known statement from Karl Marx, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs." Tax isn't directly transferred to the needy, however. Instead, they're collected by the state, subsequently redistributed according to centrally established economic programs like welfare, tax credits, or public services. The tax system today is generally progressive, meaning that the more you earn, the more tax you pay. Typically, a certain amount can be earned before you begin paying tax, but once this threshold is passed, you pay the lowest tax rate. Once another threshold is passed, you then pay a higher rate of tax, and this pattern can continue for a predetermined number of bands within the tax system of a particular country or region. The percentage of tax deducted can be as low as 10% on lower bands, or as high as 50% for those on higher income. This can make the tax system dramatically different from one place to the next, which is why there is so much debate about what constitutes taxing the rich. The argument against higher taxes is far more nuanced than people may realize. While it's often suggested that this is just the complaints of rich and powerful people that don't want to lose their privilege, the more radical argument revolves around the statement, "Taxation is theft," where it's stated that taxation is no better than theft because there's no meaningful difference in practice. While it's argued that taxation is a necessary mechanism of redressing the balance between the haves and have-nots in society, others argue that this doesn't work in practice given that it destroys social mobility. This may seem unlikely given that taxation is taken from the rich and transferred to those on lower incomes, but if we imagine the rich pulling up a ladder once they've already become wealthy, making it impossible for others to achieve similar success, this makes more sense. This metaphor works because higher taxes make it difficult for others to build wealth. If you already have a lot of wealth, it's much easier to avoid taxation because you're more capable of taking advantage of tax loopholes that allow you to avoid paying more tax. This can be as straightforward as a good accountant that can help you pay less tax, or the ability to move to parts of the world where taxation is lower. These places are sometimes called tax havens, which are utterly despised by those who argue for higher taxation. This is perhaps the greatest flashpoint between those who argue that we need to tax the rich versus those who argue that taxes are too high. People who prefer lower taxes believe that losing a great deal of your income to government intervention destroys social mobility and allows a few at the top to consolidate power, while people who want higher taxes argue that lowering taxes creates inequality between those at the top and the bottom. The favored solution for those who argue for lower taxes comes in two forms. The first is a far less complicated system of reduced tax bands and lower tax rates. The second is a flat tax. A flat tax being one tax band for everyone, irrespective of income. Sometimes this has a tax-free allowance before you begin paying tax, but when people do pay tax, this is the same percentage for all. Defenders of a progressive tax system say that the wealthiest in society will not pay their fair share under such a system, but this depends on what one means by fair share, given that a percentage of a higher income is mathematically greater than the same percentage of a lower income. Now that we've laid out both sides of the argument, allow me to elaborate on whether lower or higher taxes are best. Practically speaking, it's impossible to imagine a world where we don't have a combination of socialism and capitalism in society, but that doesn't mean that there's no limit to how much we can tax. It's therefore important to acknowledge that socialist policies are impossible without taxation to fund it, but you cannot tax indefinitely without destroying your economy. If you don't believe this, feel free to look at the history of communism and what happened to economies like Argentina, Zimbabwe, or Cuba as taxation, regulation, and economic control increased.
Ha! So you think invoking the ghost of communism is going to dismiss the injustice of capitalism? Embargoes and sanctions are what harmed productive socialist economies in the past. And that's the inconvenient truth that capitalists don't want to admit.
Whether it's capitalism or socialism you endorse, it's folly to argue that there's no limit to how much you can tax. Taxes today are objectively very high historically when we look at the OECD average, which makes up some of the wealthiest countries in the world. Western Europe is especially high when compared to the OECD average.
That doesn't prove anything. Statistics show that higher taxes improve overall happiness for society and quality of life for ordinary people.
Happiness and quality of life are subjective measurements that can be manipulated by bias, whereas growth in taxation is objectively reflected in a shrinking number of middle-income earners or a declining middle class. Whenever taxes get too high, people complain that it's too hard to fund a middle-income lifestyle or basic essentials like healthcare and retirement. What this tells us is that those arguing for lower taxes are right to state that raising taxes doesn't necessarily affect the wealthiest people in society. Instead, the wealthiest people are the most capable of avoiding tax, meaning that this disproportionately affects everyday people and slowly erodes the middle class.
You're just making assumptions. You haven't proven that higher taxes affect the middle class.
How about this? Any meaningful metric will tell you that the cost of living has risen sharply over the years in every place that truly matters. This has coincided with the growth of the state as well as higher taxes. While there are other metrics to consider, such as housing shortages and global markets, it's easy for economic growth to be distorted by unproductive government spending or high-income earners raising the average salary way above most people. Nonetheless, an average income earner struggles to afford everyday costs like mortgages, rent, rising food and energy costs, or running a car. These are things that were far more affordable on an average income in previous generations, making it far more difficult for younger generations to achieve a similar standard of living today.
It's late-stage capitalism that causes the cost of living to rise. Taxes are used to combat inequality by redistributing wealth to those in need and prevent capitalists from raising prices too high.
It's hardly surprising that this is your perspective, but let's consider another problem: the sheer number of taxes, often leading to something called double taxation, though in reality you can pay taxes far more than double occasions. Once you've directly paid tax on your income, you're then required to pay other direct taxes on investments or capital gains tax, followed by tax on the property you live in, owned or otherwise, corporation tax if you run a business, inheritance tax, and road or car tax. You then have your indirect taxes on spending, such as VAT or sales tax, duties and taxes on fuel or energy costs, stamp duty on property purchases, wealth taxes on luxury goods, and sin taxes on sugary food, alcohol, tobacco, high-fat food, gambling, and anything else added to that list. This is hardly an exhaustive list of all the ways taxes are collected, but add this all up and it's plain to see that people are easily losing at least 50% of their income to taxation, which could be far more in higher tax countries. Sin taxes are particularly revealing because it's argued that this will help people to stop or reduce certain behaviors considered harmful. And yet, when people argue that other taxes can cause behavior that reduces economic activity, this is often dismissed.
What? Sin taxes stop negative behavior. Other taxes have a positive effect. So...
Let me conclude this video by saying that the resulting fallout of a high-tax socialist society is a two-tier system of no true social mobility, with those at the top who live relatively well compared to the majority who struggle to maintain a lifestyle that invariably worsens over time. Let me know what you think in the comment section, and if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe.